Hello, and welcome to Side 1, Side B with Dave and Steve. This is our second episode, and I am Dave.
And I'm Steve.
And we are it's my turn to bring an album. And Steve, what do you know about the band Talking Heads?
Well, we watched that live DVD a few weeks ago, so that's pretty much it.
Oh yeah, Stop Making Sense?
Yeah. Where he had the big suit.
Yeah. So they were a part of like the initial New York City's like CBGB's, Max's Kansas City, Mud Club, punk scene, like in the mid-'70s that kind of became huge in 77. They were on the arty side of things. That was, the New York scene was the more arty scene to begin with compared to like London and LA.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but they were the art nerds out of the art nerd scene. Because, like, the other arty bands within their scene were the hard-drinking, hard-drugs poet types who did a lot of heroin and talked a lot about religion and stuff, while Talking Heads were the, kind of like, they dressed preppy as kind of a joke, but, kind of like the preppy art nerds who were into mosaics and doing, like, their second album was even called More Songs About Buildings and Food. But yeah, the album that I brought is not Stop Making Sense, but it is their first live record called, the name of this band is Talking Heads, and it represents what their live show was like and basically the first three phases of their career. So like there's some stuff from the really early stuff, there's after they'd started getting some momentum and playing bigger venues, and then there was the one with the expanded lineup when they were starting to do world tours. All of this is before Stop Making Sense. Stop Making Sense was done in the early 80s to promote their fifth record. This album was put out between their fourth and their fifth record when they were kind of on a break to work on side projects to make sure that they didn't completely burn out from working together, is kind of what I think was going on without it being directly stated, because that was like at the point where like some tensions were starting to develop behind the scenes, but they all kind of went and did like some solo or side stuff and put this out in between to just kind of show everyone that, hey, we're still out there, we're just working on our own stuff for a minute.
So as far as who's in the band at this time, does this band have like a stable lineup, or does it change throughout this? Because it looks like this is over a few different eras. They more or less had a stable lineup. Their very early days, they started as a three-piece. The three-piece stuff isn't represented there because by the time they released their first album, they'd added a fourth member, and that fourth member was with the band through its entire run, as well as the original three. Oh, okay.
So like there's their initial four-piece that this starts at the beginning of. That was the one that played at CBGB's and existed alongside like the Ramones and Patti Smith and Television and the Heartbreakers and bands like that. But then by 1980, they were getting more and more into both funk and experimental electronic music. Funk was because they'd always been kind of interested in funk and soul. The experimental electronic stuff was because their second through fourth albums, they'd worked a lot with ambient music pioneer, among many other things. Brian Eno, will do like an episode on Brian Eno later. I'm not even scratching the surface by calling him that, but working with Brian Eno kind of led them to be more experimental and play around with like jamming on a single chord for a while and then taking pieces of that and mixing that into whole new songs. And so by the time they went to tour with that kind of stuff, they realized they needed to expand their lineup greatly, so they added another guitar player, another bass player, and Tina Weymouth, who had been the bass player previously, would sometimes do a bass line with the additional bass player, but other times would like switch to guitar or synthesizer. Then they added like a percussionist, another keyboard player, backup singers, and it went from small type band to a kind of big sweeping band, and you'll hear it as we get into it. But the first LP is just two different eras of when they were a four-piece. So
gotcha. Yeah, I'm looking at the cover here, and the first side here The first side here shows them as more of a living room band. I'm guessing this one represents the 77 to 79 era.
Yep.
And then you flip it, and I really like how you flip it horizontally instead of vertically. And on this side, it's their later 80 to 81 era, and there's a whole bunch of different members on stage now. Looks like we got some interesting looking instruments here. Got a Jaguar bass, Jaguar guitar, Telecaster, acoustic guitar. Then you flip it over and Strats and Tellys.
Yeah, they get more expensive instruments. Like if you look at the synth on the back, that's a Prophet 5. You can't even see the little cheap organ that they have to the side on the front there. But yeah, it's they get a lot more resources as they keep going.
Let's cue it up.
All right, that was first side of the first LP. Steve, what did you think?
I thought it was a very fantastic recording.
So yeah, they recorded it in like a living room studio in Massachusetts a couple months after their first record, Talking Head 77, came out. A lot of energy. Yeah. What did you think of David Byrne's vocals?
First, I'll mention that the production on this was great for it being recorded in a living room, although, I mean, I record in a living room, so I guess that shouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But, David Byrne's vocals are great. He's not a technical singer, but that's not what you're going for with this kind of stuff, so very unique. I thought the rhythm section was fantastic. How many people were playing on this?
4.
So that was 4 people, because they made a lot of noise for 4 people. Like there was a lot of different like counter melodies going on and stuff like that.
Like a lot of the bands in the New York punk scene at that time, like I know what most people think about when they think about that scene is like the Ramones, where it's just one rhythm guitar playing really fast. But a lot of the bands in that scene were known for like the interplay of like 2 guitarists off of each other. Like the band that everyone thought would hit big from that scene was called Television. And they had a 10-minute song called Marquee Moon, which is just all interweaving guitar melodies. And so, yeah, like this was like the arty New York punk scene was a lot of like dynamic back and forth guitar parts like that, which is one thing I really love about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of energy and they're all really good at like filling up the space. I would have assumed that there were 6 people playing, at least, with all that was going on. And rarely do I think the musicians were playing the same melody. It looked like they were all kind of doing something different most of the time.
Big shout out to the rhythm section, particularly the bassist, Tina Weymouth. She learned bass for the band, and they recruited her because she was Chris Franz, the drummer's girlfriend.
Oh, that was it?
And that somehow worked out. I have seen a billion like small local bands where that has happened, and has been a complete disaster. So
she's a great bass player. I noted that when I was listening to it. I really like that deep, clean bass tone.
Yeah, and it really kind of holds things down. Like at the end of Psycho Killer, where the whole song speeds up and David, Jerry, and Chris are all kind of freaking out, and she's just playing, like just that driving bass line, just a lot faster than she was, and just kind of holding the whole thing down.
Yeah, Psycho Killer I think is my favorite on there, but I liked all of the songs on it.
Yeah. So my favorite particular song on this one is the second one, A Clean Break, and the reason why that's my favorite song on this one is that song was never released on any other album.
Oh, yeah.
That was a song they did live for this and kind of got lost in the shuffle after that, and it is kind of one of the best songs they ever did as a band.
Yeah, we were talking about that last time, like great songs that just kind of never get brought up again or whatever.
Yeah.
Did they ever play it like later on?
I think they did. They didn't include the whole session, so they chose to include it, so they clearly didn't want to get lost. If you do ever want to hear the whole session, when they released the CD version of this in like the 90s, they added a bunch of tracks.
I noticed it's almost twice as long when I was looking at the Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, and so like they for the CD version, they made sure to have like this entire living room studio set, which I think is really cool.
Wow. And I also got to say, except for like at the end when you can hear like the crowd of probably like about a dozen people or whatever, I would have assumed this was a studio recording. I thought it was that good.
Yeah. Well, fun thing is, like, if you look at the credits, it was mixed by Ed Stasium, who is mainly known for working with the Ramones. So it was like the scene, like they did all know each other, and like there was around this time when Talking Heads and Ramones like did a U.S. tour together, which if I had a time machine, that'd be a show I would want to see.
Oh, wow. If I had a time machine, there's so many shows that I'd go and see. But yeah, that'd probably be a noteworthy one.
Yeah. And then another highlight just for the songs in that is the third one, Don't Worry About the Government, just because it's a song called Don't Worry About the Government.
Yeah.
And it's just about like some guy who's completely isolated and doing his own thing and not living any kind of life that would get him into any trouble. And so it's kind of like a little subtle dig at normal centrism there.
Yeah, it's like, that doesn't sound familiar at all these days.
I also like one thing that is on this first side that David Byrne stops doing is introducing most of the songs, but the name of this song is New Feeling, and that's what it's about. Like that's something that he eventually kind of stopped doing as he got more confident, but I find it charming, and I'm glad that he did it. Like the name of this album is kind of a reference to that by calling it, the name of this band is Talking Heads.
That's funny.
But it's also called that because they wanted to emphasize that it's Talking Heads, not the Talking Heads.
Oh. All right, on to side B. Oh, and one more fun fact I think I read on Wikipedia is they played without David Byrne in the 90s, I think it was, and they called it the Shrunken Heads. And it really doesn't have anything to do with this, but I thought it was funny.
That was the second side of the name of this band is Talking Heads. A little context for it. That one was recorded at a Capitol Theater in a city I don't remember in New Jersey, so much bigger than a little living room studio in Massachusetts. Bigger crowd. It was recorded in 79, so that would have been after they'd released their next two albums. So while first side was mainly stuff off of their first album, 77, this was mainly stuff off of their second album, more songs about buildings and food, and their third album, Fear of Music. One song on there was a little different. That one was Love Goes to a Building on Fire. That was their very first single, and the studio version of that was before Jerry joined the band, so it's the only single they recorded as a three-piece. That was side two. Steve, what did you think about it as compared to the first side?
Well, it obviously had more of a live feeling since this was recorded in an auditorium rather than... The first thing I noticed is that it had a very 80s sound, so I asked Dave what year this was, and he said 79, so it's like, oh yeah, so the 80s is coming, basically. So it's like you can hear the influence that it's going to have on the next decade. I think my favorite song on it was the last one, Memories.
Oh yeah, Memories Can't Wait. That is their dark, menacing New York drug song, and it's really good. It's one of the best songs off their third album, Fear of Music, which was them kind of shifting into darker lyrical content. Their second album, more songs about building and food, lyrically is pretty similar to 77, like a lot of kind of weird songs about the observations David Byrne makes about the world around him, and it was largely made of leftover songs from that era, and the reason why it stands out as a great album of its own right is largely because of the production, which was when Brian Eno kind of stepped in and became kind of the unofficial fifth member. He never played with them live, but like his work in the studio really pushed them forward. And so more songs about building and food, like, well, it has some great songs on it. Like, what makes it really great is the production kind of propelled the band forward into what they would become. Well, then their third album, Fear of Music, was them sitting in, that more kind of spooky, atmospheric moment and writing, like, appropriately dark lyrics to fit that. So you had, like, Memories Can't Wait and Air were the two ones off of this side that were from that album. And, they're pretty different from, like, Stay Hungry and Artists Only, which were the more songs about building and food ones. Just kind of, like, darker, more menacing. Like, the synth on Air was appropriately atmospheric. And just like I really love like the moment in the vocals for Air. Some people say not to worry about the air. Some people don't know shit about the air. It's like a darker, angrier version of like the complacent people who say don't worry about anything, that he was more lightly making fun of, and don't worry about the government back on the first side.
Similar themes.
Yeah.
It's almost like these songs ended up influencing probably two different sets of rock and roll, because while I could hear like the influence on 80s new wave, I wouldn't be surprised if the guys from Rush were listening to this when they were making moving pictures or listening to Talking Heads anyway.
Oh, they definitely were. Yeah.
But I could also hear, especially in the darker ones that you mentioned, beginnings of like grunge. I could hear like Melvins, Soundgarden, Nirvana, that type of stuff too. So there's just everything in this, I've noticed.
Yeah, they were an incredibly eclectic band. I think everyone, even if you're not like a super fan like me that likes everything on their first 5 albums and then a lot of stuff on their later stuff too, you can find something you like among anything they do. So they just kind of went where the inspiration took them, and they didn't care about like how abstract and weird it got. They just kind of went there. Around the time they put out this live album, one of the side projects David Byrne was working on was he and Brian Eno just made an album with no vocal tracks on it. They just grabbed random samples of like different televangelists being creepy. They called it My Life in the Bushes of Ghosts. My favorite song off of that is kind of like the most controversial one. It's called A Jezebel Spirit, and it takes like the actual recorded samples of an exorcism and plays back like the preacher being weird and talking about how the woman who he's talking to is possessed, and it is just this fantastic creepy song.
That's really cool.
One thing that I think I should note is the difference between this, the original LP version, and the CD version with a billion more tracks in it, is the CD version includes an entire different performance from 78 that it puts in between like the 77 Massachusetts living room studio set with this like bigger auditorium set, and kind of bridges the gap a little bit. And I think it's all songs off of More Songs About Building and Food on that, except for an earlier version of a song that would later show up on Fear of Music that sounds pretty different. But I think it does a really good job at bridging the gap between, like the kind of quirky band who would release an album called More Songs About Building and Food, and then the kind who would do like the creepy, atmospheric, dark and threatening synths and release an album, like a just incredibly paranoid album called Fear of Music. So that's the main thing I have to say about side 2.
Fantastic. What do you have to look forward to on this next side?
This next side is going to be when they expanded their lineup considerably for their 4th album, Remain in Light, which, like, this live album, this double live album, is my favorite album of theirs, like my favorite to listen to. But if you had to ask me what their best album was, I would have to say Remain in Light. It's when they really they decided to really lean into like the African funk type stuff, and let's jam on a single chord for 7 minutes, but still record like the kind of dark, menacing lyrics that we did for Fear of Music, and just kind of go from there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I asked Dave again how many people were playing on this side, and he said, still 4.
Yeah, so, this is still 4 people.
Yeah, we'll get to see what they sound like with even more people, finally. So.
Yeah, I think it's like 8 or 9, maybe 10. I'd have to like count the names in the credits to say exactly how many people were on stage for this next part that we're going to listen to.
Well, all right. Well, we're going to go on to side 3 now. So we'll be back after that.
Great. That was side C. Just going to confuse who does which numbering system in this episode, because why not? Yeah, Steve, what did you think about that one? That one was the one with more than 4 people.
Indeed, definitely had a very large sound. Each side, it's almost like it ramps up even more, and with the addition of more musicians, they were able to somehow sound even bigger.
Yeah, I counted while listening to it. That's 6 more people on stage. It was a 10-piece. But yeah, one thing that I think is interesting about this one in particular, I'm going to kind of go over the different musicians that were on it. Most of them were funk musicians. Some of them were like label mates. Some of them were just people they knew from New York.
Yeah, they really ramped up the funk on this side.
Yeah, I have called Talking Heads before dance music for people with anxiety disorders.
I can see that because that's exactly. I have anxiety disorder, so I'm like, oh, that kind of works really well with my anxiety and ADHD.
Yeah, and the keyboard player they added for this side was Bernie Mornell, and he previously had worked with Parliament Funkadelic, so he was kind of one of the bigger names that they had. The second bass player they added, because yes, they had a lot of those songs either had two basses or Tina would switch to guitar or synthesizer. But the second bass player they added was Busta Jones, and he was someone who had just kind of been around the scene. From what I gather, this has been from reading a lot of secondhand sources and the like, including Wikipedia when I can't sleep at 3 a.m. But yeah, some of this, he was pigeonholed by a lot of the labels as a session player for funk bands, but he considered himself more of a rock guy because the studios were being racist. He was a black guy, and he wanted to play on rock music, so he would kind of briefly join up with rock bands to see if he could launch more of a rock career, and it just never ended up going anywhere.
Was the label run by Cartman?
Yeah, which I think is one of the great unfair things, because he's great. After he did this, he decided to join with the English post-punk band Gang of Four for all of one tour when their bass player quit, and they wanted to keep him on, but he was like, no, I kind of want to see if I can do my own thing now that I've successfully played with Talking Heads and Gang of Four, and went nowhere with the label. He co-wrote a song with the Ramones at one point in the 80s. He was kind of all over the place, and I wish his career had taken off the way he wanted it to, because he's great. The two backup singers, Delette McDonald and Nona Hendrix, I can't find much on Delette McDonald. I don't know what she did after this. She didn't end up being one of the backup singers on Stop Making Sense, the concert movie that came later. Nona Hendrix was a label mate who had her own solo career unrelated to this, which I think she just kind of went on back to doing after all this. Steve Scales was the percussionist. He was on Stop Making Sense too. And then the one member of this expanded lineup that wasn't, part of the whole New York funk thing was Adrian Belew, who Brian Eno brought on because Brian Eno had played with him on David Bowie's Lodger album, which Eno didn't produce, but he was the keyboard player on, and he had worked with this great guitar player named Adrian Belew, who would then go on to be the guitarist and lead singer, so I guess backup guitarist, lead singer of King Crimson, so just playing along with Robert Fripp.
Oh yeah,
So they got a little bit of prog in there with all the funk. And then
I was gonna say this album reminds me a lot of the prog bands that were going on at the time, because I could hear some similarities with the Rush albums that were coming out at the time, the Yes albums that were coming out at the time, Genesis. I feel like they're probably pretty good stable mates with the progressive rock bands that were coming out at the time. I could even hear some Pink Floyd.
Yeah. All these bands are listening to each other. From what I can tell, the rivalry between punk and new wave and prog was largely manufactured to sell newspapers.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me.
I know John Lydon, Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols didn't like Pink Floyd, but that's about it. And his complaints about Pink Floyd were complaints Roger Waters made about Pink Floyd, so I even take those with a grain of salt. So
I always thought the rivalries between punk and metal was kind of weird too.
Yeah. Well, and then once I read, going back to Genesis a little bit, I read an interview with Peter Gabriel once where he was talking about, I went to punk shows all the time. No one gave me any trouble. They knew who I was. They went to our shows too. We just kind of hung out. I think Peter Gabriel loved going to the Clash especially. And
I can see Peter Gabriel liking Clash.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more cross-germination between a lot of the different bands at that time.
Yeah, because I could hear a lot of prog rock in this, and it's probably with introducing the funk and the gospel aspects that was being done by a lot of the prog bands at the time. So it's really cool to hear the progression we've heard so far.
Yeah, and I know I talked a lot about Remain in Light going into this, but 3 of the 4 songs on this side are Fear of Music tracks just played with the expanded lineup. The one Remain in Light one on this side was Houses in Motion, the really long one that was second to the last. And that one you can really hear the difference in. But Ezimbra, which, speaking of King Crimson, the studio version of Ezimbra has a guest guitarist on it, Robert Fripp.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So,
by the way, did you see that Robert Fripp started an OnlyFans account?
good for him.
Everybody go subscribe to Robert Fripp's OnlyFans account. Let's make that get up there.
Yes. I want him to be the #1 creator on OnlyFans.
Oh, that'd be amazing. I think my favorite song on this was on this side was Drugs.
Drugs is an amazing song. It's one of my all-time favorite Talking Heads songs.
It had a lot of great hooks in it.
Yeah, it has like a billion hooks, and I'm glad it's on this one too, because like Drugs was the song that closed out Fear of Music, and it was the one where they Ezimbra was the track that opened Fear of Music, and Drugs was the one that closed it, and both of those were the ones that were kind of the precursors to what they'd end up doing in Remain in Light, where Ezimbra was, like them playing around with funk and African polyrhythms and stuff like that, while Drugs was playing around with the let's all just record a bunch of different things, jamming on the same chord or different parts in the same key, and then grab different parts and kind of combine them together into something that we didn't play together in studio to just create this weird, dark, alienating song.
Yeah, that'd be pretty easy to do these days with the kind of tools that we have with digital recording studios. But back then, that had to have been a pain in the ass to put together.
It must have been, too. And I think Drugs would have been a song they just abandoned if they didn't have that method. Because, what they were doing in the studios, they weren't quite happy with. There's an early version of it called Electricity, which is on the CD version because they played it in '78, which I love, but it doesn't sound very much like what ended up coming out at all. And so I think it probably would have ended up being abandoned and just kind of resurfaced on compilations and live albums the way A Clean Break from the first side did, if they hadn't figured out a new way to just record it and then go that way for their entire next album.
So what do we have to look forward to on this next side, on side D or 4 or whatever the fuck?
Last side we have their Al Green cover, Take Me to the River, which is actually from their second album, More Songs About Building and Food, but
which was also on Stop Making Sense.
Yeah, which is also on Stop Making Sense. And that one was this live version is a lot different from what they did in the album, because on the album it's clearly recorded by a 4-piece. This one, it really uses the backup singer as well to make it more like a gospel song, and it just sounds huge and sweeping. And then we have 2 of the extended one-chord jam sessions with The Great Curve and Cross-Eyed and Painless to close out the whole thing, and just a great note to conclude this whole thing on, because I really feel like this song doesn't have live versions of every essential song that had come out at this point, but it really does a good job at giving the whole trajectory of their career up to this point. The CD version has every essential song they've done at this point.
Yeah, this is a very good retrospective. As somebody that's not very familiar with this group, I feel like this covers, if you wanted to start somewhere, I feel like this would be a good starting place.
I would actually recommend this as a starting place over a greatest hits album.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are going to flip it over to the last side and then wrap things up. So see you in a little bit. All right, and that was the name of this band is Talking Heads. I have a confession to make. I have listened to the CD version more than the vinyl version because of how much I listen to music while driving. So I believed the song order that was written on the back of the album, but it was wrong. Take Me to the River was the last song of side 4, not the first.
Yeah, that got me. I was kind of confused by that. I'm like, wow, this sounds way different than the Stop Making Sense version.
Yeah.
I want to get one of those big mouth Billy basses and hack it so it's the version of this song, because remember it saying, Take Me to the River.
Yeah, that'd be so good. But yeah, one thing that's really impressive about listening to their live show evolve over the course of 4 years is just David Byrne's evolution as a vocalist. He's barely together in the first one in a way that he has control of and that he uses well. He sings much closer to something that seems on key by 1981.
There was never a moment where I thought he was a bad vocalist, but I did notice as they progressed, his vocals were getting a lot better. Whereas I thought the band from the beginning were incredibly tight.
This is, I think, one of the more dramatic changes over 4 years that I think any band has gone through, while still seeming like the same band. That they didn't like radically shift out of left field. That they just naturally evolved this way, but like in such a wild direction.
It's crazy that's only 4 years, because that almost seems like a decade of progress.
Yeah. But yeah, what was your favorite track of that last side there?
I think the opening track was probably my favorite one.
Oh, The Great Curve?
Yeah,
that one's really good.
Yeah, I think overall, I thought that one seemed like a continuation of the previous side in a lot of ways, because the first record was stripped back and then almost like a studio version, and then a proper like live side, and then this one's like the full ensembles, and that continued on side 1 and side B. Or side 3 and side D. I thought, just like the rest of it, there was never a point on this entire record where I was bored and wanted it to get to the next song. All of the instrumentation is very engaging on this, I'd say.
Yeah, especially when they're doing like the repetitive single chord funk music, they're able to just catch and grab your attention with it.
Yeah,
which I think is really cool. I really liked the way that both of the basses sound together on Cross-Eyed and Painless. I thought that was really cool. I think it was interesting that I would call both bass lines and bass sounds muscular, but they didn't sound the same. They were muscular in a different way. Like Tina's was more punchy, while Busta's was a little more fluid.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
One thing, going back to Adrian Belew, like his soloing, I think is really cool on here. You can look up videos of this era when he was in the band. You know, he'd left by Stop Making Sense, but you can see him playing and doing like really weird stuff, like tuning while playing to do how some of those notes are sliding. And then one final comment I really have about this record as a whole is this is one of those bands where if there is a live version of, I think, any of their songs, I think I like that version better than the version in the studio. I do love the studio tracks, but there's just like energy and vitality to it. And I'm a big Brian Eno fan, so this is no disrespect to him and the kind of stuff he did in the studio and helped them really, like discover what these songs were. But there's just like the faster tempo, the more aggressive vocal delivery, the punchier basses. It all just works so much better live. And one of the reasons why I really like a lot of their stuff live is they had a tendency to, in the studio, fade their stuff out before they would on the live track. And I've heard people say that they think fade outs are an excuse and they didn't know how to finish the song. I don't think that's true in this case, because I feel like sometimes the best part of the song is what's after the fade out. Like if we want to go all the way back to side 2, there was that song Stay Hungry, where at the end there's just like kind of went from a punchier, funkier song to kind of like a dronier, creepy song. And like the vocals in that was, like, here's that rhythm again, here's my shoulder blade, here's the picture I saved, here's the sound I made, here I am, oh, here I am. And it just gets like more aggressive. The studio version fades out while he's doing like the here's that picture I saved part, and I think the song is weaker for that. Going back to side 3 with Life During Wartime, the live versions always keep going when the studio versions start fading out on the line, You Better Get You Some Sleep, which is a fun place to fade out because it feels like the song is going on forever and it's about like the daily lives of urban guerrillas after society has collapsed. And so it's like, oh, it feels like it's never ending and it keeps going, but just like the lyrics that they have after the fade out, like my chest is aching and it burns like a furnace, the burning keeps me alive, I think is really cool. And then I just like the extended like high energy instrumental jam they have after that too. So there's just a number of reasons why I just feel like their live versions sound like more vital and more important in the moment to me.
That reminds me a lot of Deep Purple and their live albums. They tend to extend their songs like well past what they did on the studio versions, and a lot of times they end up doing like these really cool jams. I think that's why Made in Japan is such a great live album. It sounds like it's a pretty similar thing with this album, where the tracks just have a bit more energy and they're able to cut loose in a way that's probably not easy to replicate in the studio.
Yeah. I wonder if me singing the entire outro to Stay Hungry is what gets Warner Brothers to come after me, but we'll see.
Oh, no. We're going to jail.
Oh, well, and so on that note, we will be living in a van loaded with weapons because we're being pursued by Warner Brothers, but we will still find a way to drop more episodes for you. Steve, what do we have next?
So last time I said we were going to do Tear by Black Sabbath, but I decided instead I'm going to pick something a lot more obscure by Iron Maiden's first vocalist, Paul Di'Anno. The first thing he did after he left Iron Maiden is a band that's just his last name, Di'Anno. Back at the time, I ended up importing the record from Europe because I could not find anywhere to listen to this record online. Like, there were no torrents. YouTube wasn't really a thing yet, so it wasn't on there to pirate. So I had to import it from England and then wait like 2 weeks for it to show up. And then I got there and I put it on my record player, and we will talk more about that next time.
Yeah, so we will see you next time. A lot of us, like going through our record collection, we're going to do weird shit we found in record stores a lot of the time, which is a lot of fun. And like a lot of my record buying days is when you could get the name of this band is Talking Heads from Half Price Books for $12, and that is how I liked buying records. And I like it that more people are listening to vinyl now, don't get me wrong, but it used to be so much cheaper.
Right, yeah. My collection's very similar. I picked up most of them back when CDs were still the main medium before streaming took off. So it was easy to find like pretty much any album I wanted for a couple of bucks. Like, sometimes you go into a shop and you'd see like The Wall for fucking $25, which is normal now, but back then you'd be like, I can find The Wall in another record shop for like $10. Yeah, it's just like I felt like that with retro video games too. Like, it was fun to find retro video games until YouTube like started shining a light on retro video games, and then now you want to play some like Nintendo game and it's like fucking $75, so it's not really fun to collect anymore.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's kind of gone that way with records. Like, you can still kind of find some gems in some certain shops, but a lot of places mark their stuff up way too high, I feel like.
I stopped record shopping as much as I used to when I got to the point where I was seeing like, oh, like, I have this album on CD, maybe I should get the vinyl version just to have both. And then, no, this is $40.
Right, yeah. Like, I'll pay $25 for an album that I really like, especially if it's brand new. Like, I don't think I'd really pay $25 for a used vinyl unless it was like a record that somebody kept in their collection and never played or something, like it's like new or something. But it was a lot more fun to just walk into a shop and be like, oh, here's Dark Side of the Moon for $6. It's a little beat up, but
yeah,
it's still cool.
Still good. Yeah. It's classic for a reason. Yeah. And it being beat up makes it look like I'm the one who has loved this particular copy for over the decades.
Yeah, it's like a relic guitar, except Time relicked it instead of some guy in a shop.
If you really want me to go after one of your guitars with a screwdriver to make it look older and more beat up than it is, I can do that.
Yeah, that's a service we offer. Someday we're going to set up a Patreon, and there's going to be a relicking your guitar tier, and you'll just ship your guitar to us, and all of the illiterates will attack it with screwdrivers.
We cannot promise you how long it will take to get back either.
Nope.
Maybe it will show up in one of our live videos before we send it back to you.
Yeah.
You can say.
You may never get it back. We might just end up liking it, so we'll attack it with screwdrivers and then keep it.
All right. On that note, I'm Dave.
And I'm Steve.
And this has been Side 1, Side B with Dave and Steve. Keep on rocking in the free world. I will come up with a better sign off that isn't just ripping off Neil Young at some point.
I was thinking Nardwar. Doot doodaloot doot.
Doot doot.
Hey everyone, Future Steve here. In our excitement, we completely forgot to do our pluggables. So here I am at 1:30 in the morning. I should be sleeping, and instead I'm here editing because I am insane. So, now that you've listened to this episode, please go check out our music. Dave and I are both in a band called The Illiterates. It's kind of like a post-punk band. If you like bands like Killing Joke, you'll definitely want to check it out. If you like this Talking Heads record, you might want to check out our experimental group, Lucid Fugue. We've done a bunch of weird, interesting experiments with that one. We've got a full length and an EP out, as well as a live single. We were both in a band called Gong Farmer. I never recorded with them, but they did release an album, and you can find all that information on my website, killrockmusic.com. It's KILRAVOCK music.com. It's named after a Scottish castle. I was looking for a name of my project, and that was shockingly not taken by a black metal band in the middle of Eastern Europe. So, anyway, best way to support us, check out our music, and we'll catch you next time.